My name's Lillian Warwick. I'm a software engineer in Seattle, crafting a life from the ground up after walking away from my family. For years, I believed I'd buried my past in Boston, where the weight of their expectations crushed me. I left behind a grand estate, my parents' real estate empire, and a sister who shone brighter in their eyes. Seattle became my refuge, a place where I could breathe, create, and be seen for who I am. I thought I'd escaped forever, convinced the ties that bound me were severed. But the past has a way of finding you. Growing up, I lived in my sister's shadow. My parents, Edward and Margaret, built Warwick Properties, a real estate giant, but their true pride was Miranda. She was their star, dazzling with charm they adored. I was just there, fading into the background. Miranda's birthdays sparkled with extravagance, mine were quiet, forgettable. Her every step was celebrated, while my efforts, hours spent studying, building dreams, went unnoticed. They saw her as the heir, the one destined to lead. I was the afterthought, told to accept my place. That invisibility carved a wound deep inside me, one I carried for years. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? I did, every single day. I built walls to protect myself, convinced I'd moved on. But one phone call shattered that illusion. It pulled me back to Boston, a city I swore I'd never return to. It wasn't just about loss, it was about secrets buried in my family's legacy. That call led me to a lawyer's office, where the truth about my place in the family unraveled. What I discovered there wasn't just about inheritance, it was about who I was meant to be. My life was about to change forever. Stick around to hear how I reclaimed what was rightfully mine. This isn't just my story, it's for anyone who's felt overlooked, pushed aside, or told they weren't enough. I walked into that lawyer's office and found more than a will, I found my purpose. Drop a comment below, where are you watching from? Share your own story of overcoming the odds. Hit that subscribe button to join me on this journey of rediscovery, where I'll take you through every step of unveiling the truth and building a legacy. Let's walk this path together, starting right now. I grew up in a world that glittered on the outside but felt hollow within. Our home in suburban Boston was a 5-bedroom colonial, sprawling across 3 acres of manicured lawns, complete with a pool, tennis court, and guest house. My parents, Edward and Margaret Warwick, had built Warwick Properties into a real estate titan, a name that echoed power across New England. From the outside, we were the picture of the perfect American family, wealthy, poised, untouchable. But inside those walls, the truth was starkly different. My sister, Miranda, 2 years older, was the golden child, the one my parents crowned as their pride and joy. From my earliest memories, I knew my place, always a step behind her, always less. At Christmas, when I was 8, Miranda unwrapped a designer doll she'd begged for, her face glowing as Mom and Dad beamed. I got a set of educational puzzles, meant to sharpen my mind, they said. Her birthdays were spectacles, pony rides, magicians, entire ballrooms filled with laughter. Mine were quiet, a simple cake in the kitchen with a handful of friends. Miranda needs the spotlight, Mom would say, her voice soft but final. You're different, Lillian. You're our thinker. Thinker. That word became a cage, a way to justify why I was overlooked. Miranda's charm, her easy smile, her way of filling a room, they saw her as the future of Warwick Properties, the heir to their empire. I was the shadow, the one who didn't fit their vision. Every small moment reinforced it, her new dresses, my hand-me-downs, her dance lessons, my math tutors. I'd watch her twirl in the living room, Dad clapping like she'd won an award, while my science project sat unnoticed on the dining table. I was 10 when I first felt the weight of their choice, a quiet ache that grew with every passing year. I didn't hate Miranda, not then. I just wanted to be seen, to matter as much as she did. But in their eyes, she was the star, and I was just there, fading into the background of their perfect story. I thought if I worked harder, shone brighter, they'd see me. So I poured myself into everything I could control. At 15, I won the regional science fair with a solar-powered city model I'd spent months perfecting. I stood on that stage, heart pounding, clutching my first-place ribbon, scanning the crowd for Mom and Dad. They were there, briefly. They clapped politely, then slipped out before the ceremony ended, rushing to Miranda's dance recital across town. "It's just a science contest, Lillian," Dad said later, his tone dismissive. Miranda's team needed her. That moment burned, a scar I carried forward. My straight A's, my late nights studying, my debate team victories, they were met with nods, a curt, "That's expected of you." But when Miranda scraped a C+ in history after nearly failing, they took her to Boston's finest restaurant, toasting her effort. I'd sit at the dinner table, my report card pristine, while they gushed over Miranda's latest social triumph. "She struggles with academics," Mom would say, as if my success was effortless, unremarkable. I built that solar model to show them I could create something grand, something that mattered. I imagined them staying, cheering, seeing me the way they saw her. But they didn't. They never did. Once, at 13, I overheard them talking in the study. "Miranda's got the charisma for the business," Dad said. "Lillian's too serious, too analytical. Too serious. Too much like someone they didn't know how to love." I'd cry in my room, the door locked, wondering why my best was never enough. Every trophy, every award, I chased their approval, but it slipped further away. Miranda's world was parties, country clubs, connections, hers was the path they paved with gold. Mine was solitary, a quiet rebellion against their indifference. I didn't want their pity, I wanted their pride. But with every overlooked achievement, I learned a truth: their love was conditional, tied to a vision of who they needed me to be. And that person wasn't me. It was Miranda, always Miranda, their chosen heir, while I fought to prove I was more than the shadow they cast me into. I refused to stay invisible. If they wouldn't see me, I'd make myself undeniable. I joined every academic club, entered every competition, pushed myself to the edge of exhaustion. By high school, I was president of the science club, captain of the debate team, and a finalist in national math contests. At 16, I built a prototype for a water filtration system that won state honors. I thought, surely, this would be enough. But their response was always the same, a brief, "Well done, Lillian," followed by a shift to Miranda's latest triumph. Her dance troupe's performance, her charity gala appearance, those were the stories that filled our dinner table. "Miranda needs social stimulation," they'd say. "You're our introvert, Lillian." Introvert. Another word that boxed me in, excused their neglect. I graduated valedictorian, my speech echoing in a packed auditorium. I looked out, hoping to see their faces, proud and present. Instead, they were checking their watches. Miranda had a dance competition that afternoon. I swallowed the hurt, delivered my speech, and walked off that stage alone. MIT accepted me, a dream I'd fought for, but it came with a catch, a partial scholarship. I needed their help to cover the rest. Business school would be more practical, Dad insisted. You could join Warwick Properties later. I argued, I want computer science. Tech's the future. Mom's lips thinned. Miranda's going to Wharton. She'll lead the company. Be realistic, Lillian. Realistic. That word cut deeper than the others. They'd decided long ago, Miranda was the heir, I was the spare. I saw it in their eyes, heard it in their silences. I was 18, standing at a crossroads, begging for a chance they'd never give. I'd spent years chasing their gaze, thinking if I was exceptional, they'd love me the way they loved her. But that day, I understood, no award, no grade, no sacrifice would change their minds. They'd chosen her path, her future, her legacy. Mine was an afterthought, a role they'd scripted without asking me. I was done pleading. I'd find my own way, even if it meant leaving everything behind. The pain of their dismissal became my fuel, pushing me toward a life they couldn't define. I walked away from their vision and chose mine. MIT was my lifeline, but my parents refused to fund it, insisting business school aligned with their empire. Miranda's the one for Warwick Properties, they said, as if my dreams were a detour. I was 18, staring at a tuition bill that loomed like a mountain. So I climbed it. I took out student loans, worked 2 part-time jobs, waitressing, tutoring, lived in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, surviving on instant noodles and grit. Every late shift, every sleepless night, I told myself I was building something they couldn't take away. Computer science became my world, a realm where logic ruled, where I could create without their approval. I excelled, not for them, but for me. By senior year, I had offers from tech giants, but I chose Peakpulse Solutions, a Seattle startup with big ideas. It was a leap, 1,000 miles from Boston, from the estate that never felt like home. I wanted distance, not just from their expectations, but from the ache of being unseen. That rejection, their refusal to see my potential, it lit a fire I hadn't known I had. I wasn't just studying to survive, I was proving I could thrive. I'd lie awake in my dorm, replaying their words, "Be realistic, Lillian." Realistic meant small, safe, secondary. I chose bold, uncertain, mine. Leaving Boston wasn't easy. I'd walk past the family photos in my apartment, my childhood smile frozen in time, and feel a pang for what could have been. But I couldn't stay in a place where I was always less. Seattle offered a fresh start, a canvas I could paint myself. I built a life there, friends who became family, a career that valued my mind. I was no longer the shadow, the thinker, the spare. I was Lillian Warwick, carving my own path. Yet, deep down, I knew the past wasn't gone. It lingered, a quiet wound, waiting for a moment to reopen. I thought I'd escaped their hold, but life has a way of pulling you back to face the things you left behind. And soon, a call would force me to confront the family I thought I'd left forever. At 22, I left Boston behind, chasing a life where I could be more than a shadow. Seattle was my escape, a city of rain and reinvention, far from the suffocating expectations of my family's estate. I landed a job at Peakpulse Solutions, a scrappy tech startup with dreams bigger than its budget. It was a risk, but I was done playing it safe. I started as a junior coder, pouring my heart into lines of code that felt like building a new world, one where I controlled the rules. My first week, I stayed late, debugging a feature that could have tanked our app. My boss noticed, pulled me aside, and said, "Lillian, you've got something special." Those words hit harder than any award I'd won in high school. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I climbed the ranks, becoming lead engineer by 25, helping grow Peakpulse from a $10 million valuation to $300 million. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, shaping a company that valued my mind, my grit, my vision. Seattle gave me more than a job, it gave me a home. I rented a tiny apartment overlooking Puget Sound, its gray waves mirroring my quiet resolve. I found friends who didn't know the Warwick name, who saw me for me. We'd hike Rainier, share late-night coffee, laugh over bad sci-fi movies. They became my family, the kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. I'd spent years begging for my parents' approval, only to realize I didn't need it. My work, my life, my choices, they were enough. But even in those moments of triumph, a part of me still carried the ache of Boston, the weight of being the overlooked daughter. I'd push it down, focus on the next project, the next milestone. I thought I could outrun the past, that distance would erase the pain of being unseen. I was wrong. The family I'd left behind wasn't done with me. Their world, their choices, their legacy, it was all waiting, ready to pull me back into a story I thought I'd closed forever. 3 years ago, I went back to Boston for my cousin's wedding. I hadn't seen my family in nearly a year, and the thought of stepping back into their world made my stomach twist. My parents, Edward and Margaret, insisted I stay at the family estate, that sprawling colonial where I'd always felt like an outsider. I wanted to say no, to keep my distance, but a part of me still hoped, maybe this time, they'd see me. The wedding was beautiful, all white roses and champagne flutes, the kind of event my parents thrived on. I sat at a corner table, watching the crowd, feeling like a guest in my own family story. Then my father stood, glass raised, his voice carrying that commanding Warwick tone. "I have an announcement," he said, beaming at Miranda across the room. "Miranda will join Warwick Properties as Executive Vice President. When I retire, she'll take over as CEO." The room erupted in applause, glasses clinking, smiles everywhere. I felt my chest tighten, the air sucked out of me. Miranda, radiant in her tailored dress, soaked up the praise, while I sat there, shrinking, disappearing all over again. They hadn't even mentioned me, not a nod, not a glance. Later, Mom found me by the bar. "Lillian, you're happy in Seattle, aren't you? With your computers?" Her words weren't cruel, but they cut. Computers. As if my career, my achievements, were a hobby she didn't understand. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, I was unraveling. They'd chosen Miranda, just like always, without a second thought for me. The future of Warwick Properties, their empire, their legacy, it was hers, not mine. I'd spent years building something of my own, proving I didn't need their approval, but that moment brought it all crashing back. The birthdays they forgot, the achievements they ignored, the love they reserved for her. I wanted to scream, to demand why I was never enough. Instead, I stayed silent, sipping my wine, knowing I couldn't stay in their world any longer. That night, I made a choice, not just to leave, but to sever the ties that kept pulling me back to their rejection. I couldn't stay silent anymore. After the wedding announcement, I followed Dad into the study, the same room where he'd once told me I was too serious for the family business. The air was thick with tension, the kind that had simmered for years. "Why her?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "Why is it always Miranda?" He sighed, looking tired, not angry. "Lillian, you're too rigid. Miranda has the charm, the intuition for this business. She feels the market." His words were a knife, sharp and familiar. I'd heard them before, but this time, they broke something in me. "You never gave me a chance," I said, my voice shaking. "You chose her when we were kids, and you're still choosing her." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. That's when Miranda walked in, her heels clicking, her smile sharp. "Don't be dramatic, Lil," she said, laughing. "This was always my path. You're happy with your tech toys, aren't you?" Tech toys. She reduced my career, my life, to a child's game. I wanted to scream, to tear apart their perfect narrative, but I saw it then, their world didn't have room for me. I left the study, my heart pounding, and packed my bags that night. By morning, I was gone, back to Seattle, their numbers blocked, their voices silenced. It wasn't just about leaving, it was about survival. I couldn't keep begging for scraps of their love, their respect. Blocking their numbers felt like cutting off a piece of myself, raw and painful, but necessary. I'd spent my life trying to fit into their mold, to be the daughter they could see. But in that moment, I chose me, my dreams, my future, my worth. Seattle was my sanctuary, a place where I wasn't defined by their choices. I threw myself into work, into friendships, into a life that felt real. But even as I built that world, their rejection lingered, a shadow I couldn't fully shake. I thought I'd escaped, that I'd rewritten my story. But family, I learned, has a way of pulling you back, no matter how far you run. For 3 years, I lived free of their shadow. Seattle became my home, a city where I could breathe without the weight of their expectations. At peak pulse, I led teams, built apps that reached millions, and earned respect I'd never known in Boston. My life filled with moments that felt like mine, weekends rock climbing in the Cascades, holiday dinners with friends who became family, late nights laughing over board games and cheap wine. I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore, I was Lillian Warwick, lead engineer, a woman who'd carved her own path. But the past wasn't gone, it was just quiet. I'd see a Boston area code on my phone and let it ring, a reminder of the life I'd left. I thought I'd moved on, that their dismissal couldn't touch me anymore. Then I heard the rumors. At a tech conference, a colleague from Boston mentioned my breakdown after college, how my parents told people I'd rejected Warwick Properties because I couldn't handle the pressure. It wasn't true, I'd chosen my path, not abandoned theirs. But they'd rewritten my story, turned my strength into failure. It stung, a fresh wound layered over old scars. I pushed it down, focused on my work, my friends, my life. I learned to rock climb, scaling cliffs that tested my body and mind, each step a reminder of my resilience. I hosted holiday dinners, surrounded by people who saw me, not the shadow I'd been. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I'd wonder, why did they lie? Why couldn't they let me be? I'd built something real, something they couldn't take, but their words still reached me, twisting the truth. I told myself I was done with them, that their world was no longer mine. I was wrong. 3 years of silence didn't erase the ties that bound us. A phone call was coming, one that would drag me back to Boston, back to the family I thought I'd left behind. It would force me to face the legacy they'd denied me, the truth they'd buried, and the path I was meant to walk. I didn't know it yet, but my story was far from over. 3 years of silence had built a fortress around my life in Seattle, a place where I'd found my footing, my purpose. At 32, I was a senior engineer at Peak Pulse Solutions, leading projects that felt like pieces of a dream I'd fought for. My days were filled with code, laughter with friends, and the quiet rhythm of a life I'd chosen. Then, one gray morning, my phone rang, an unfamiliar Boston number that stopped me cold. It was my aunt, Clara, her voice heavy with grief. "Lillian," she said, "your parents are gone." Edward and Margaret Warwick, the architects of my childhood's pain, had died in a car crash on an icy Boston road, coming home from their 35th anniversary dinner. The words landed like stones in a still pond, sending ripples through me, but not the kind I expected. I waited for tears, for sorrow to crash over me like a wave. Instead, there was nothing, just a hollow, aching emptiness where grief should have been. I hadn't spoken to them in 3 years, not since that night at my cousin's wedding when their dismissal broke me. I'd blocked their voices, their calls, their world, thinking it would shield me. But hearing they were gone, I realized something: you can't block out loss. It finds you, seeps into the cracks of the life you've built. I sat at my desk, staring at the Seattle skyline, the city that had become my refuge, and felt unmoored. My parents were larger than life, Edward, with his commanding presence, Margaret, with her poised elegance. They'd shaped me, even in their absence, their rejection the fire that drove me forward. Now they were gone, and I didn't know how to feel. Anger? Regret? Relief? All I knew was that the past I'd buried wasn't dead, it was waiting. Aunt Clara's voice lingered. "There's a will reading, Lillian. You need to come home." Home. That word felt foreign, a place I'd left behind. But something in her tone, a quiet urgency, told me this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning I couldn't ignore. I didn't want to go back. Boston held nothing but memories of being unseen, a city where I'd always been the shadow to Miranda's light. But Clara's call, and the lawyer's insistence, pulled me in. Mr. Clarence Thornton, my parents' attorney, left a voicemail. Miss Warwick, your presence is required at the will reading. It's in your best interest. His words echoed, stirring a mix of dread and curiosity. I booked a red-eye flight, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask. Why me? Everything was Miranda's, always had been. Landing in Boston felt like stepping into a past I'd outrun. The air was sharp, the city draped in winter's gray, a stark contrast to Seattle's soft rain. I couldn't face the family estate, that cold colonial where I'd never belonged, so I stayed with friends, their warm apartment a buffer against the memories. Driving through the city, I passed the old house, its windows dark, and felt a pang I couldn't name. I stopped at my childhood bedroom, untouched since I'd left for college. There, tucked in a drawer, was a letter from Dad, never sent. Lillian, it read, I misjudged you. I don't know how to fix it. The words hit like a punch, raw and unfinished. He'd tried to reach me, but hadn't. Why? I folded the letter, my hands trembling, unsure if it was regret or anger coursing through me. I assumed the will would confirm what I'd always known, Miranda was their heir, the golden child destined for Warwick Properties. I was there out of obligation, to close a chapter I'd already written off. But that letter, its halting apology, planted a seed of doubt. What if there was more to this? I wasn't ready to face Miranda, her smug certainty, or the family's judgment. Yet, something told me I had to go, to walk into that lawyer's office and confront whatever truth was waiting. I'd spent years building a life free of their control, but now, Boston was calling me back, demanding I face the family I'd left behind. The past wasn't done with me, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Boston wasn't just a city, it was a mirror, reflecting every wound I'd tried to forget. A few days before the will reading, I met my high school friend Kate at a coffee shop in Back Bay. We laughed over old memories, but then her face grew serious. Lillian, she said, hesitating, I heard you had a breakdown after college. That's why you left the family business, right? Her words stopped me cold. A breakdown? I stared at her, the hum of the cafe fading. Who told you that? I asked, my voice tight. She shrugged, uneasy. It's just what people said. Your parents mentioned it at a charity event. I felt a surge of betrayal, sharp and familiar. My parents had lied, spun a story that painted me as fragile, unstable, unfit for their empire. I hadn't had a breakdown, I'd chosen my path, built a career at Peak Pulse, thrived in Seattle. But they'd rewritten my strength as weakness, my independence as failure. I drove to the cemetery that afternoon, needing to confront them, even if it was just their graves. The air was bitter, snow dusting the ground. Standing before their headstones, I whispered, why didn't you see me? Why did you lie? The silence was deafening, their absence louder than their presence had ever been. I'd spent years convincing myself their rejection didn't matter, that I'd moved on. But those lies they told, those whispers that reached even my friends, they cut deeper than I expected. They'd erased me, not just from their lives, but from their story, crafting a narrative where Miranda was the heir and I was the broken one. I wanted answers, not just for the lies, but for the years I'd spent chasing their approval. Why had they chosen her, always her? Why had they let me go? The graves offered no response, just cold stone and fading names. I left, my heart heavy, knowing the will reading was looming. I expected it to be the final confirmation of their choice, Miranda's triumph, my erasure. But something in me, a quiet stubborn spark, refused to accept that ending. The truth was out there, waiting, and I was about to walk into it. The day before the will reading, I went back to the cemetery, drawn by a need I couldn't explain. As I stood there, lost in thought, a familiar voice broke the silence. Mrs. Evelyn Porter, our family's housekeeper for decades, approached, her eyes soft with recognition. Lillian, she said, I knew you'd come back." Her words carried a warmth I hadn't felt in years, but also a weight, like she knew something I didn't. "Your father changed," she told me, her voice low. "He regretted everything, how he treated you, how he pushed you away." I froze, her words stirring the ache of that unsent letter. "He tried to reach you," she continued. "He wrote letters, called, but they never got through." Letters? I'd never received them. My mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Why had they stopped? Who had stopped them? Mrs. Porter's gaze held mine, steady but sad. "He saw you, Lillian, in the end. He knew you were the one who carried his father's heart. Jonathan Warwick, my grandfather, the man who'd built Warwick Properties on integrity, not flash." Her words lit a flicker of hope, but also confusion. If Dad had changed, why hadn't I known? That night, I drove past the family estate, its silhouette stark against the winter sky. As I slowed, I saw Miranda in the window, her face cold, her eyes locking with mine. It wasn't just a glance, it was a challenge, a silent claim to everything I'd been denied. My heart pounded, a mix of anger and resolve. Something was coming, something bigger than I'd imagined. Mrs. Porter's words echoed, "He regretted everything." Had Dad tried to make it right? Had Miranda known? The pieces didn't fit, not yet, but I felt the weight of a truth about to break free. I'd come to Boston expecting closure, a final goodbye to a family that never wanted me. But now, I sensed a different ending, one that might rewrite everything I thought I knew. The will reading was tomorrow, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what I'd find. The past was unraveling, and I was about to step into its heart. I walked into Mr. Clarence Thornton's office at 11 a.m., my heart a heavy knot of dread and defiance. The air was thick with the weight of what was coming, a moment I'd convinced myself would seal my erasure. Miranda sat across the polished table, her posture perfect, draped in our mother's pearls, her eyes glinting with that familiar smug certainty. Her husband, Elliot, hovered beside her, his smile too polished, too practiced. "I didn't think you'd stay for this, Lillian," Miranda said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. I ignored her, taking my seat, my hands steady despite the storm inside. Mr. Thornton, gray-haired and deliberate, adjusted his glasses and opened a leather-bound folder. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Edward and Margaret Warwick," he began, his tone measured. I braced myself, expecting the inevitable, Miranda's name, her inheritance, her triumph. I was here to close a chapter, to walk away for good. But then Thornton's words shifted, sharp and unexpected. 3 weeks before his death, Edward Warwick amended his will. The room seemed to tilt, the air growing still. I glanced at Miranda, her smile faltering, a crack in her perfect facade. Thornton continued, his voice cutting through the silence. "Control of Warwick Properties, in accordance with Jonathan Warwick's trust, is bequeathed to Lillian Warwick." My breath caught, the words echoing in my mind like a distant bell. Me? The company, the empire my parents had built, the legacy they'd always reserved for Miranda, it was mine. I sat frozen, the weight of it sinking in, a truth I couldn't grasp. Miranda's face drained of color, her hands gripping the table. "This is a mistake," she snapped, her voice rising, sharp with panic. "I've been groomed for this my whole life." Thornton didn't flinch, his gaze steady on the documents. I looked at him, then at her, my mind racing. For years, I'd been the shadow, the afterthought. Now, in this sterile office, the world had flipped. The past I'd buried was unraveling, and I was at its center, holding a truth I never expected to claim. Miranda's outburst hung in the air, her voice a desperate plea against a truth she couldn't accept. Mr. Thornton raised a hand, calm but firm, silencing her. "There's more," he said, reaching for a tablet on the table. Edward left a recorded statement, to be played in the event of this reading. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and longing. What could Dad say now, after years of silence, after choosing Miranda over me time and again? Thornton tapped the screen, and my father's face appeared, older than I remembered, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't name. "Lillian," he began, his voice low, steady, but laced with regret. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I've left you with a burden I should have carried. You're your grandfather's true heir." My breath hitched, the words piercing through years of pain. Jonathan Warwick, the man who'd built the company on integrity, not flash, Dad was tying me to him. "Miranda," he continued, his tone hardening, "your deal with Meridian Properties showed greed, not vision. You chased short-term gain, not the legacy your grandfather intended." Miranda gasped, her face twisting with fury, but Dad's voice pressed on. "Lillian, you have the mind, the heart, the discipline to lead Warwick Properties. I saw it too late, but I see it now." Tears burned my eyes, a flood I hadn't expected. He'd seen me. After all those years of dismissal, of pushing me aside, he'd seen me. The video ended, the screen fading to black, but his words lingered, heavy and bittersweet. I wanted to hate him, to reject his belated recognition, but a part of me, small, wounded, hopeful, clung to it. Miranda slammed her hand on the table. "This is absurd. He wasn't in his right mind." Thornton shook his head, producing medical evaluations, proof of Dad's clarity. I sat there, stunned, the weight of his words settling over me. For the first time, I wasn't the spare, the shadow. I was the heir, chosen not by chance but by a father who'd finally understood. But with that truth came another: the family I'd lost wasn't what I'd thought, and the fight for my place was just beginning. The room was a battlefield, the air charged with Miranda's rage and my reeling heart. I couldn't tear my eyes from her, her perfect mask crumbling, revealing something raw and desperate. I thought of Mrs. Porter's words at the cemetery, Dad's letters, his attempts to reach me, lost somewhere along the way. I turned to Miranda, my voice low, steady, but burning with years of unspoken pain. "You stopped his letters, didn't you?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of guilt before defiance took over. "You abandoned us first, Lillian," she snapped, her voice venomous. "You ran off to play with your computers, left us to carry the family." Her words were a dodge, but they cut, twisting my choice into betrayal. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat, his expression grim. "There's more you should know, Miss Warwick." He slid a folder across the table, filled with emails, contracts, proof that tore the air from my lungs. Miranda had intercepted Dad's letters, blocking his attempts to reconcile with me. But that was only the beginning. She'd been planning to sell Warwick Landing, my grandfather's first project, a historic marina that symbolized his legacy, to her husband's friend at a fraction of its value. The deal was a betrayal, not just of me, but of everything our family stood for. "You were dismantling the company," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. Miranda's face hardened, but she didn't deny it. "I was saving it," she hissed. "You wouldn't understand, you never cared about the business." Her words were a lie, a desperate attempt to rewrite her greed as necessity. I thought of all the years I'd spent proving myself, building a career she'd mocked as tech toys. Now, here was the truth: she'd stolen my chance to heal with Dad, not out of love for the company, but to secure her own power. The pain of her betrayal was sharp, a wound layered over decades of being overlooked. I wanted to scream, to demand why she'd hated me enough to erase me. But in her eyes, I saw no remorse, only anger at being caught. The sister I'd once envied, once loved, was a stranger, and the legacy I'd been denied was now mine to reclaim. The truth lay bare, a jagged edge cutting through the lies that had defined our family. Mr. Thornton's folder wasn't done revealing its secrets. Walter Grayson, a longtime board member, stepped into the room, his face grim, holding a stack of audit reports. "Miss Warwick," he said to me, "we've uncovered more. The documents detailed Miranda's mismanagement, inflated contracts, kickbacks to her allies, secret deals that bled Warwick Properties dry. She'd been unraveling my grandfather's legacy, piece by piece, for years. Miranda's face was ashen, her hands trembling as she clutched Elliot's arm. "This is a setup," she cried, her voice breaking. But the evidence was undeniable, a trail of greed that led straight to her. She stood, her chair scraping the floor, and stormed out, Elliot trailing behind, their whispers sharp with panic. I watched her go, my heart a tangle of triumph and sorrow. She'd taken so much, my father's letters, my chance at reconciliation, my place in the family. Now, her empire of lies was collapsing. Thornton turned to me, his voice steady. "Lillian, the board supports your leadership. Your father's intent is clear, and the trust is airtight." I nodded, the weight of it settling over me. Warwick Properties was mine, not as a gift, but as a responsibility, a chance to honor my grandfather's vision, to rebuild what Miranda had broken. I thought of Dad's video, his regret, his recognition. It wasn't the love I'd craved as a child, but it was a truth I could carry forward. Miranda's legal challenge, I learned later, would fail. The evidence was too strong, Dad's clarity too well documented. I didn't hate her, not anymore. She was my sister, caught in a role our parents had cast her in, just as I'd been cast as the spare. But her choices were hers, and they'd cost her everything. As I left Thornton's office, the Boston skyline loomed outside, a city that had once rejected me now waiting for my lead. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath me shift, not to push me aside, but to lift me up. I'd won, not just the company, but my place, my purpose, my truth. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready. The truth had shifted everything, and now Warwick Properties was mine, not as a prize, but a weight I hadn't expected to carry. Miranda's legal challenge crumbled under the clarity of Dad's will and the board's support. I stepped into the CEO's office, a room once filled with my father's presence, now echoing with my own resolve. The task ahead was daunting, the company was a mess, tangled in Miranda's mismanagement. Audits revealed inflated contracts, secret kickbacks, and deals that drained the legacy my grandfather, Jonathan Warwick, had built. I spent weeks unraveling her choices, each discovery a reminder of her betrayal. But I didn't want to destroy her, she was still my sister, caught in a role our parents had scripted. I offered her a position on the development team, a chance to contribute without power. "You're part of this family," I told her, my voice steady but heavy. "Let's rebuild, but honestly." She accepted, her eyes guarded, her pride bruised. Leading wasn't about revenge, it was about restoring what mattered. I sat at Dad's desk, his old chair creaking under me, and felt the weight of his regret, his late recognition of my worth. I wasn't the shadow anymore, but the one steering the ship. The board trusted me, seeing my discipline, my vision, qualities they'd overlooked in Miranda's flash. I wasn't just fixing contracts, I was mending a legacy torn apart by greed. Every decision, every late night, I channeled my grandfather's values, integrity, community, permanence. This wasn't the triumph I'd imagined as a child, begging for their love. It was harder, truer, a responsibility to prove I was enough, not just for them, but for myself. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to lead, to redefine what Warwick meant, and to build something lasting. Warwick Properties wasn't just a business, it was my grandfather's heart, poured into brick and mortar for the community he loved. I wanted to honor that, to rebuild what Miranda had nearly dismantled. I launched the Warwick Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to affordable housing, a nod to Jonathan Warwick's belief that wealth should serve, not divide. At the launch event, I stood before a crowd, my voice steady but my heart full, speaking of homes for those who'd been priced out of Boston's soaring market. It wasn't just a project, it was a promise to carry forward a legacy of care. I visited Warwick Landing, the marina my grandfather built, its weathered docks stretching into the harbor. Standing there, the salt air sharp, I felt him, his vision, his strength. I vowed to protect it, to keep it from the quick profit deals Miranda had planned. In Dad's study, I found his journal, its pages worn, his handwriting unsteady. "Lillian," he wrote, "you're the true heir. I saw you too late." Those words broke me, not with anger, but with a bittersweet ache. He'd known, in the end, that I carried his father's spirit. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd dreamed of as a child, but it was enough, a quiet acknowledgement that I mattered. The foundation grew, its first projects breaking ground, each one a step toward healing the wounds of a fractured family. I wasn't erasing the past, I was building on it, layering my grandfather's dreams with my own. Every decision, every home we planned, felt like a conversation with him, a way to say, "I'm here, and I'm carrying this forward." The marina, the foundation, the company, they were my way of honoring a legacy that had almost been lost, and of proving I was more than the shadow I'd been told I was. Miranda and I weren't whole, but we were trying. At the Warwick Foundation's launch, she stood in the crowd, her face softer, her presence a tentative olive branch. We exchanged a cautious nod, not forgiveness, but a start. She was working under me now, her role small, her pride humbled. I didn't want her broken, I wanted her to see what we could rebuild together. I split my time between Seattle and Boston, balancing the life I'd chosen with the legacy I'd inherited. The company was stabilizing, its foundation stronger than before. Warwick Landing gleamed under new management, its docks alive with families, not profit schemes. Standing there at sunset, the horizon gold, I felt a peace I hadn't known. This wasn't about winning, it was about purpose. My parents' rejection, Miranda's betrayal, they'd shaped me, but they didn't define me. I was building a life that honored my grandfather's values and my own strength. The wounds were still there, faint but present, but they were healing. Miranda and I might never be close, but we were family, bound by a shared past and a fragile hope. I'd found my place, not in their approval, but in the legacy I was creating, one step at a time. I lost my parents, but I found a purpose that anchors me. Sitting at my father's desk, surrounded by family photos, I see the journey clearly now. Those faded images, a Maine sailing trip, a rare smile from Mom, hold pain, but also truth. My family broke me, shaped me, showed me who I was meant to be. I spent years chasing their approval, only to learn it wasn't what I needed. Their rejection, their lies, they carved a path to something greater, my own strength. My grandfather's values, integrity, community, live in the Warwick Foundation, in every home we build. My father's regret, scrawled in his journal, lives in me too, a reminder to see others as he couldn't see me. Boston's skyline twinkles outside, a city I once fled now part of my story. I'm still learning, still healing, but I'm where I need to be. The wounds of being unseen, of Miranda's betrayal, they're fading, replaced by a quiet peace. Family isn't just blood, it's the legacy you choose to carry. I've found mine, not in their love, but in the life I'm building, one that honors the past while forging my own future. Have you ever had a moment where life flipped, and you saw your true path? Maybe it was a loss, a betrayal, or a quiet realization that changed everything. I found mine in a lawyer's office, reclaiming a legacy I never expected. My stories for anyone who's felt invisible, told they weren't enough. Share your moment below, I read every comment, and your words inspire me. Where are you watching from? Let's connect, build a community of stories that matter. Next, I'll share how I balance Seattle's freedom with Boston's legacy, and what's ahead for Warwick Properties. Hit that like button if this resonated, and subscribe to walk this path with me. Your support keeps this journey alive. I used to think family defined me, but I've learned we define ourselves, through choices, through resilience, through purpose. Your story, like mine, is still unfolding. Tell it, live it, let it shine. Drop a comment, share your truth, and let's keep going together. This isn't just my path, it's ours, a road of rediscovery, of finding where we belong. Join me, and let's see where it leads, one step, one story, at a time.